Hello, everyone. Welcome back. There are very few organizations in the world building at the frontier of AI, where capabilities being developed are genuinely new, where the implications are still being understood, and where the people doing the work carry real responsibility for getting it right. Anthropic is one of them. My guest works on the frontiers of AI and the governance function, shaping what responsible innovation looks like. As head of security GRC at Anthropic, Adrienne Allen has a vantage point almost no one else has. Deep visibility into what frontier AI models can actually do, what it means for security and compliance, and what it looks like to build governance program around technology that is actively redefining what's possible. That's a unique position and a serious responsibility. The decisions her team make about how to manage AI security and govern agentic AI internally aren't just internal policies, they're an early signal for how the rest of us, the rest of the industry, will need to think about this as these capabilities become broadly available. I'm genuinely excited for this conversation. Adrian, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ronen. Great to be here.
So let's start at the ground level. What does a normal day in security and GRC at Anthropic actually looks like?
Yeah. So a normal day, I think, is one really exciting because at the end of the day, we are trying to redefine what risk and compliance looks like at this type of company. So I'll talk about it in terms of two categories. I think at the 30,000 foot view for Security GRC, a lot of it is still foundational program building and problem solving just at hyperspeed. Demand for security expertise can really dramatically change week over week. And so there's a lot of context switching and trying to understand where the puck is skating to before it quite gets
Yeah.
there. So a lot of time spent kind of reading shifts across where the company is investing. I think the other piece of this that's really interesting is that challenges in building a security capability that would normally appear a few years into a company's maturity journey are all here right now at the same time. And so we're trying to build up these things in parallel. There's a lot of simultaneity. They're incredible tools, but it's a lot of kind of prioritization on the fly. And then I think second for a GRC team, it's still taking a lot of time to understand the incredible capabilities of these models, of the products that are being put out there. But it's also observing everything else that happens, the risks, the incidents, the duplication, the information overload, really trying to understand from observation what's happening to inform governance. So it's almost like live risk management, but a lot of it is just straight up learning still. I think when you have troves of information constantly being generated on a daily basis, a normal day is still just trying to cut to what is most critical, what is most true that particular day, and kind of leaving the rest of the noise aside.
Very cool. So obviously, like this is an agentic development security summit, and you have your own developers that you're responsible for. So obviously, your developers are using AI every day. I think the entire industry tries to learn from them and how they use it. So, like from a security and GRC standpoint, how do you actually govern that? Like, how do you actually deal with these developers and kind of this new world where developers are using this kind of agentic technology to do their work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've seen a lot of evolution here. Maybe a year or two ago, if you had asked this same question, I think a lot of teams would have given you their policy and acknowledged that's like the first step in this direction. I think if you ask now who has written and reviewed the last 1,000 production changes, watch what happens. It's just a really interesting world that we're in right now. I think the reality is that AI writing and reviewing code is actually very, very effective. So, from a governance standpoint, the risks are changing and the compliance risk is changing as AI becomes more and more integrated with the SDLC and the CI/CD pipeline specifically. And is also playing more of a role in writing and reviewing code. So I'm going to kind of explain it from the GRC point of view here, because obviously the security one is very well documented. I
Yeah.
think when a developer uses an AI coding tool to write a suggestion, someone else reviews it, it gets approved. That's still human in the loop. So the governance question is the human doing their job? Do they have the sufficient expertise to review and approve that change? And are the checks and balances between the humans effective? Is there a collusion there or kind of risk of conflict of interest? But the moment that an agent can read the code base, open a PR, call other tools, that's a different type of actor in the environment. And so I think that's kind of one element that we're working through. I think the second piece of this is that from a compliance standpoint, multiple of these frameworks, whether it's SOC 2, ISO, even SOX, ICFR, they all expect that changes are reviewed before deployment to production, right? The volume of changes has completely changed with this AI code writing and generation. And so humans really have become the bottleneck in terms of human reviews in the loop. It's just not scaling anymore. And I think we've all seen how broken that can become when you have this onslaught of changes that no one has time to review. And it gets sharper. The auditors will sample pull requests. An auditor will ask who approved a given change. Were they independent of the author? But when a model is authoring most of the population, then sampling is also a little bit more ceremony. So these are some of the big shifts on the auditing side. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, all of these audit frameworks rely on the concept of human accountability. These frameworks don't recognize AI as a control that can replace a human being accountable. So the question isn't necessarily, can AI approve this merge? The question is, who is accountable if this particular merge causes a downstream impact? And can someone demonstrate reasonable oversight of the system that approved this? So the human will stay in the loop, probably not at a per change review location. We're trying to figure out where else in the SDLC it makes sense to have that human review. But we're working through the auditors with this. And ultimately, per usual, we'll want to take a risk-based approach. I think continuing to invest in automated agentic reviews is really important. We've seen significant improvements in risk reduction and incident avoidance with agentic reviews. And we actually do use a mix of automated agentic review and deterministic review too. Absolutely want to continue pushing in that direction. But we're also tiering code bases by risk, tiering changes by risk as well. There's some code bases that will always have a human in the loop no matter what, just based off of the risk level of that code base, any sort of relevant regulatory requirements around that. We always will keep that somewhat protected. But we have a wider risk appetite for other types of changes that don't need, kind of a per change human in the loop. And then also looking at compensating controls. What are the key invariants that we would want to see from changes going through? Can we put more pressure on our testing, for example? Can we put more pressure on kind of post hoc analysis? So kind of evaluating a lot of that. And then ultimately at the end of the day, like any governance program would, making sure that there's a specific policy that speaks to our philosophy about this. We've identified, again, those key invariants, those key controls, and making sure that they're monitored and resulting in alerts throughout the process. So those are some of the areas that we're exploring.
So you do see at some point that the compliance framework will kind of adopt these new agentic actors and kind of figure out how they need to evolve to this new era. But obviously it takes, like, it's not going to take a day, and it's a process that it sounds like you're the one, Anthropic is the one leading it, obviously because of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I've heard of a few different companies that are very quickly recognizing this challenge as well and leaning into it. So I know we're not the only one. Fortunately, I think some of the standards are written in a way that is flexible enough to account for, this type of activity. The frameworks are there because there is some risk that was common enough across enough places for there to be sort of standardized controls to speak to that. So I think what we want to continually do with the auditors is go back to what was the original risk that this is trying to protect against? Is the substance of the control still there at the end of the day? And we can often work within the given standards. There are some, though, that will be more prescriptive, though, and that will take working with bodies like the PCAOB and others to, potentially rewrite some of what's currently in place. But yes, it's fun work, and it's been good to collaborate with our partners across the company and the auditors to start thinking through this.
Awesome. Cool. Obviously, back to kind of the stuff that you're working on. So, being at Anthropic, you see where models capabilities are heading, probably better than everyone else. I'm sure you're seeing stuff before they get released and before we're aware of. So, what should security and GRC leaders be doing right now to get ready? And what are they're not doing that they should be?
Yeah, great question. I have a couple thoughts, but I'm actually going to take advantage of this moment for my GRC peers just to advocate that I think risk and compliance must be more dynamic. And I think if CISOs have not invested in the right engineering resources to support some of the automation of GRC programs, that is a must. The entire company, all of security is trying to move faster to keep up with the velocity of AI changes and business opportunities and workflows. That diff between where risk teams and compliance teams are and where the rest of the business and even security is will grow wider and wider. Many GRC teams are also pretty dependent on shared services to build for them. And those use cases often sit further down in the stack. But I think if you're in an industry where your SOC controls are important, continuous assurance is important, your customer regulatory audit expectations assume that you have good control design and you really understand the state of your controls, you have to take the time to invest in the right engineering resources for these teams. I think maybe two specific takeaways too. I think the pace of risk appetite, dynamic exposure here is so fast. Maybe just two kind of tactical recommendations. I do think putting pretty quick expiration dates on AI risk acceptances is one recommendation that I'd have. Key to the model. We may actually have two separate models, we collectively, not Anthropic, or more within like a 12-month period. And so a risk acceptance that's tied to a particular point in time is very quickly going to drift again from what that risk acceptance was intended to control against 12 months ago. So I think the frequency of revisiting those risk decisions, the frequency of looking at your risk exposure is going to be really important. So you can start with just changing the expiration dates. Don't let it get too long out in front of you. And then second, and this is something I say all the time in wherever I possibly can, is that I'm a firm believer that if a control isn't testable, it's not real. And I think for GRC teams, we often come up with the right controls in partnership with our engineering security brethren to say this is the right control that we think adequately protects against bad scenario X. But I think it's important for GRC teams to write down the controls that you're actually not testing, that you're relying on today, and maybe track that as a collective KPI within the org.
Sounds really good. And again, there's also like a bit of similarity between how you look at agentic development and kind of how you need to evolve there, and how to think of GRC in the age of AI. So it's really interesting to see kind of these 2 points, one after another.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like back to I guess like our main topic. So what's something about AI governance you believed a year ago? And I'm sure everything evolves really fast, and we just talked about adjusting as we go. So what's something about AI governance you believed a year ago that you since then change your mind?
Yeah, I think one thing that came to mind, I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but one of the things that changed for me most significantly, probably day one when I joined Anthropic, was that, I think as security, governance minded people, some of us have a tendency, and I'll throw myself under the bus for this one, have a tendency to be, kind of hold the line of caution to maintain that good tension when the business wants to go nuts with whatever cool thing they want to pursue. And I think the main thing for me was just completely letting that caution go out the window in order to really just, have fun with Claude. I think it's incredibly important for GRC teams to deeply understand this technology for a couple reasons. And if your enterprise, I know we all kind of, this resonates with all of us. If your enterprise doesn't allow for that, either because of restrictions or risk tolerances or company policies, do it in your personal life on a personal machine, but spend the time to really play around with whatever your favorite AI tool is and get comfortable with it. I think that was a big aha moment for me, where we have to just dive in and learn it and have fun, even if we don't fully understand the risk that we're taking on with every single action that we do. And again, that's why I say use your personal machine.
Yeah.
But I think in order for us to govern in motion, which we've talked about, in order for us to really understand the business point of view and the desire to put this technology in place in so many areas, you'll be a lot less comfortable shaping risk decisions and providing input into those decisions because the trade-offs won't be as clear. So one, I think just to kind of unlock your own learning. Two, it's amazing technology and everyone should learn it. But three, I think in order to be a true governance partner, a true risk partner to a given company, you have to know it. So take that time to have fun with it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think once you start playing with it, like you understand the potential, but also like the limitations.
Yes,
And
yes.
just as you called out before, it's about being in the details and understanding like what can I automate, what can I trust, maybe with less controls, and then where do I need to be put more scrutiny, like invest more. So
Yeah.
100% agree. Like play with it. Doesn't matter which vendor.
Yep. Yep.
It's the
Exactly.
best way to get the feel.
Definitely.
Um, I haven't heard someone that compared, like they tried to do an analogy of like where we are today, and they said that it's like we were giving this alien technology, and now like the world needs to figure out how to handle it as we go. So to me, like play with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
You know,
one thing that we've talked about is sometimes it feels like we are living in the future because we have access to a lot of really cool experiments that are going on. And I think the experimentation can teach us a lot too about, to your point, like what to trust, what not to trust, where it fails, and where you really do need to QA it. That's been a big theme for us as well. But it's yeah, you have to get engaged.
yeah. So talking to many of our customers and obviously prospects, like one common thing is that like everybody wants to be an enabler for AI. Like nobody wants to kind of be the person saying no. And obviously at Anthropic, you guys are shipping almost like on a daily basis new features and new capabilities. So that's kind of the fastest shipping pace that we see in the market. But you're also a safety company. So how do you stay an enabler instead of becoming like a department that keeps saying no to stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe two or three thoughts here. Um, First, I do think it's worth calling out this is not a new challenge for security. I think security has always grappled with how to enable the business in the best ways. And so I think there are a couple of principles that stay true no matter what. Um, get in the design phase early, really understand the architecture, the data processing, the primitives that do or do not exist in order to kind of break apart the um, really just like the specific environment that you're trying to assess. One of the constructs that we recently have been talking more about is sort of this idea that agentic AI really kind of falls into two separate, or maybe there's like an axis on, there are two like versions of this. One would be more of like a personal version on a local machine, like the equivalent of like a cowork or something. And then the other would be more of like an infrastructure agent, like a service account that's given access to a particular business process. It can work autonomously, but it's in a shared environment. And then on the other axis is this idea of autonomy. Either one of those types of agents can have very little autonomy. It's, the permissions are scoped very narrowly, read access only, et cetera. Or it has a lot more autonomy based on the level of trust that you've given it. And so you can kind of set up your control plane along those two axes. What controls does a local agent require? What are the particular risks that would be introduced there versus more of like a service account and part of your CI/CD pipeline, for example? Does it have access to review and write code? And then I think so, like that might be one example of a construct where like security would really want to dig into like how is this being designed? What are the frameworks that we can use and begin to apply a bit more repeatedly and like begin to ingrain those as controls as key invariants again, those things that we always want to hold true. And I think that kind of takes me into the next part of what has worked really well for security in the past when dealing with this is security culture is always best when security is cheap and easy for people to inherit. So again, what are the primitives and the technical controls that we're able to build in that people don't even have to think about? If you're relying on a policy control, it'll break 7 ways to Sunday. If it's a technical control, it's much harder to be bypassed. You can reason with it a bit more in real time. So I think those two things hold true. I also think that at the end of the day, the reality is that every company does have to make trade-offs between the business goals on one side versus security on the other. And this is, I think, where risk comes in. Sometimes the business is willing to accept security risk because there's a more critical outcome or the bet is bigger on the other side. Sometimes the risk is much more important to burn down in security. And I think that's when you discover that what you're interacting with is the company risk appetite. Some decisions are going to exceed that risk appetite and will be an acceptance that needs to be made at the right levels with the right level of visibility, and others feel like they'll fit within it. I see security and GRC's job as naming that risk appetite, even if it isn't formalized yet for newer companies, help name it for the leaders to enable them to decide whether they're willing to exceed what has kind of been normal at the company up until that point, but make sure that is a process, that it is named, it's documented, there's traceability there, help them hold themselves accountable. And I think in particular for security teams, the critical role there is ensuring that the data is there, that people understand how that data was retrieved and the source of it to help inform that leader's decision and provide an honest opinion to go with it. They may disagree with the security take, but security's role is not to change the mind. It's to make sure that that leader has a really honest, data-backed picture of what they're dealing with. So I think when it comes to unleashing new AI deployments, investing in new technologies where we don't fully understand the risk. One, it always starts with understanding the data, the specific use cases. What is the blast radius if something goes wrong? Can we reconstruct the changes that something may have made? How are we thinking about scalability and visibility? But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to naming those unknowns, naming the risk appetite that you're exceeding, and allowing the business to make those decisions. And that goes over very well.
I think it's a great framing and probably would really help our audience here. We touched this a bit before, but just want to close like this topic. So we talked a little bit about standards and basically the regulation. So like from your point of view, do you see auditors and regulators like responding in the right way? Do you see standards being like actually evolving? Kind of, do we trust agents? Do we let agents help us? Like, do you see this going there, or where do you see it stand right now?
Yeah, it's a bit of a spectrum. All of these conversations are evolving too. Most auditors are leaning hard into these questions and engaging alongside us. They want to use AI at work too, so they have a vested interest in seeing
Yeah.
clarity here. I think the real answer, maybe just to put a fine point on what we discussed earlier, is that some standards are flexible enough to account for it, but maybe the specific ways of testing or the example, like the illustrative examples and like an ISO standard, for example, may need to change. Some are too prescriptive and will need a larger standards body to go in and help with revisions. And then I think there's definitely a need for probably some new security standards to be drafted. And there's a lot of good industry work happening in this space to help with some of the more specific implementation guidance around some of these topics. But we do see a lot of engagement here. Yes, I think it's clear that there's a gap in some spaces more so than others.
Awesome. And so we're getting close to our time. So last question, and please take this wherever you want. So what's one thing you know now that you wish the rest of the industry understood?
Yeah, a few things came to mind here. And at the risk of saying something that people already know, but I think is worth calling out, something that you referred to a little bit earlier, Ronen, I think information reliability and quality is getting more challenging. These models are incredibly capable. And I think the more that teams get access to AI capabilities, the more AI generated information becomes available. And so you're sitting under a trove of info, not just data, but information that is drowning teams. Every time inference costs get cheaper, the volume of AI actions inside a company skyrocket. But your verification capacity doesn't necessarily go up with it. So I think one thing that we are spending a good amount of time thinking through is deterministic versus probabilistic. What is your discipline to pressure test the data that you are seeing in the figures that AI is gathering for you, the risk write-ups that you're reading, the controls that you believe are operating, but maybe the coverage or the reliability, the performance has since changed from when you originally designed the control. I think QA and frequent testing, adversarial testing, is really, really important. And also just knowing when AI is overkill, you should just go do the thing that you need to do. Sometimes it's easier to just write the doc instead of asking, AI to go do it for you, or, go build some detection rules instead of having AI do it for you. But I think we're going to see a lot more focus on information fidelity and these deterministic controls. I think this is really where cryptographic verification, testing, the new segregation of duties are going to become more and more important. So my piece of advice would be, take a fact checking approach, a bit more academic approach to really understand and drive that discipline within the teams of understanding like where and how exactly was this data produced. Can we reproduce that? How do we ensure that we're maintaining high data quality there? And I think if there's one last thing I would say is just invest for the exponential. Things are changing so fast, and it's very easy to kind of get caught up in the short term view. We focus a lot on model capabilities right now, but it's really just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more under the hood in terms of the harnesses, the infrastructure, the environment that needs long-term building all around the models. And I think a lot of this, what we're talking about even right here, it's probably going to be out of date in a month. So take that long range view.
Awesome. Yeah. And so what I'm taking from this is that the governance and security problem of the agentic era aren't a theoretical thing for you guys at Anthropic. They're operational. And the decision that your team is making right now, without a complete storybook and without all the answers, are going to shape how the rest of the industry thinks about this. So Adrienne, thank you very much for being candid about what's actually hard. This is exactly the kind of conversation the summit exists to have. I appreciate the time that you spent with us. Really, thank you. And I'll pass it back to Monica to take us to the next session. Monica, back to you.